Ani, Buzu, everyone. Welcome to Lakehead University's Indigenous Initiatives and the School of Social Work Speaker Series, Part 2, Anishinaabeg Mind, Returning to Whom We Have Always Been, the application of Anishinaabeg knowledge within social systems with invited speaker and educator, Nicholas Deliri. Lakehead University respectfully acknowledges its campuses are located on the traditional lands of Indigenous peoples. Lakehead Aurelia is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg, which include the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. Lakehead Thunder Bay is located on the traditional lands of the Fort William First Nation, signatory to the Robinson Superior Treaty of 1850. Lakehead University acknowledges the history that many nations hold in the areas around our campuses and is committed to a relationship with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples based on the principles of mutual trust, respect, reciprocity, and collaboration in the spirit of reconciliation. As a university educator, as a university and also a profession, being social work, that is committed to decolonization and pursuing reconciliation in a genuine and meaningful way, it's important for us to recognize the harm that educational and social work policies and practices have had and continue to have on Indigenous peoples. To this end, we must also be mindful of the legacy of settler colonialism and white supremacist logics that we have internalized as individuals, as a society and country. We therefore have a responsibility to challenge, disrupt, and dismantle these colonial mindsets and make every effort to consistently prioritize and embody anti-colonial practices within all aspects of our personal and professional lives to reestablish balance and harmony in our interactions and within all relationships. As an educator, I acknowledge the unlearning and relearning that must take place, and I will continue my efforts to decolonize and indigenize social work education and practice to the best of my ability. Wherever you are joining us from this evening, I encourage you to also reflect on the colonial history of this nation, the continued strength and resilience of Indigenous people, and the responsibility and commitment we respectively have to advance reconciliation and maintain good relations with Mother Earth and all of creation. Miigwech, and thank you to all of you as well for attending tonight's event. My name is Dr. Anita Valancourt, and I'm a faculty member in the School of Social Work, and I'm also teaching the Social Work 4411 course, Social Work Practice and Indigenous Peoples, this semester. This speaker series is a collaboration between Indigenous Initiatives and the School of Social Work via this course that came about for the purpose of extending the learning occurring in our institution to the community, while also recognizing the important role and contributions that the Indigenous community can play to advance social work education and post-secondary education as a whole. It is our aim, as it's our aim, to provide post-secondary educational opportunities that foster greater understanding of Indigenous culture and wellness. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce Nicholas Deliri. Nicholas Deliri is an Anishinaabe, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, Otomi. He is a longtime member of the Three Fires Medewan Lodge, a recognized Medewan teacher, a lodge and pipe chief. Nicholas is a registered band member of the Chippewa of the Thames. Before we begin, I'll welcome Nicholas to the floor here, and he can provide you with some more details about himself. And also just a reminder that there will be a Q&A session following Nicholas's presentation. At that time, we're going to ask participants, or participants will be able to ask questions. And for those who are joining us virtually, they can submit their questions through the Q&A option. Miigwech, and welcome, Nicholas.
It's been a while since I've been back here up on the lecture podium. And so it's going to take a bit of getting used to here. And my coffee has arrived. My partner, his beautiful partner, is bringing in my coffee. Didn't have time to get the coffee. My real name is Migizi Winine. Up there it says on the big screen thing. And I have an English name. My English name is Nicholas. and miigwech. And I belong to the Loon clan, and we're probably one of the. We're also known to be a very humble clan, and also very handsome. Just kidding. Lighten up, it's a Wednesday in the middle of the week. So I'm honored to be here and to do this work and to come back here to the podium. I spent quite a few years doing this. I began lecturing way back many years ago. I think the Flock of Seagulls were popular way back then, as well as the Sex Pistols and the Ramones. So it's been a while since I've been teaching, but I was doing this full time. I've taught close to over 6,000 students in my career, and in the later part of my career, I was fed up with universities and colleges. So I moved to Toronto. I taught high school, and fell in love again with teaching and the reasons why I went into teaching. And so that's a little bit of what I have done. Let me see, next slide here. So we're going to cover some things like Indigenous knowledge, Western European knowledge. We're going to get onto a subject called returning to our minds, our Indigenous minds, and then ancestors' legacies, and a little bit of imprinting on what epigenetics means to us. So I'm going to try to, next slide. Not my transition, not working right. Okay, so who am I? You heard a little bit of who I am. I am a Ojibwe Otome. Otome are from central Mexico. As we get this out of there, without breaking it, there. Okay, I'm Ojibwe Anishinaabeg Otome. Otome are from central Mexico. That's where my mother's from. My father is from here on this side of the Great Lakes, the Canadian. So I have my official status card, and I am an Indian. Some of you are being taught to call us Indigenous, First Nations. I'm an Indian. That's what the card says. Section 9124, I'm legally bound to be an Indian. So that's what they want to call me. So I use that when I do my Indian work for the government. But, so there's all these terms. What else? I'm a survivor of academia. I never published any books. I was very fortunate when I first went to university that we were under Jesuit University College in Sudbury at Laurentian, and the old Jesuits told us in our department, don't write anything. Don't do any papers, don't do any books, don't do anything until you've reached the age of maturity, way long past your university academic career. Then you can begin to sit down and write your papers, because after a while, you'll assimilate all that knowledge, you'll put the knowledge together, you'll gather that knowledge, and you don't have to worry about your job. Most faculty at universities are worried about jobs, publishing or perish, the whole publishing perish paradigm. You're doing is just cranking out paper after paper for half-baked ideas. So the Jesuits were smart. Wait till you get older and mature, and you've brought all this information together, and then write about it later. What else do I do? I'm a grandfather. I have 10 beautiful grandchildren. I have one great-granddaughter, and she's 3, going on 3.5, I believe. Anyway, I have a whole pile of them. And what else? I'm an artist. Some of my artwork there. Some jewelry, some paintings, and one of my illustrations on the Ontario license plate. So I'm an artist at the same time. I practice that. I have to force myself to do artwork to get out of projects and things like that. So I spend time doing that. My partner, I just moved up here to Rama area, and living here now in Rama with my beautiful partner, and I'm happy she can join me here to participate in this lecture here. One of the big things that I'm very much interested in and working on is language preservation, promotion, retention, and I am continuing to learn my own language, and then the culture loss of our culture. I don't believe in reconciliation. I think it's a farce, and even though my good friend Murray will tell me otherwise. But reconciliation, I don't really subscribe to that, and I'm not resilient. I'm just here. In a sense, I'm doing what I do. So next slide here. So a very dear friend of mine, when I first began teaching at university, was Dr. James Dumont. And he lives not very far from here, maybe about 30 minutes away in Barrie. And he is still very much active, not as much as he used to, but he's a very dear friend of mine. And I've known him for many years. Once I first graduated from Trent University, I was picked up by the University of Sudbury Department of Native Studies. And I began my teaching academic career at that place. I guess my academic career began earlier because I was at Trent University. Back then, we called it Indian Studies. See, so we've never gotten really lost. We've never deviated from the term. We're still Indians. At Indian Studies at Trent University and at Lakehead and University of Sudbury, Laurentian. So Jim says some really interesting things in this paper that I presented to you for your reading, your consumption. And I know you didn't probably want to get another paper to read before the end of the term, but nonetheless, if you had a chance to look at it, the very first paragraph would be really useful to read. Intelligence has been defined for us through the eyes of Euro-American psychological scientific community. Its definition is limited to its application and understanding. What we have been pursuing as Indigenous people since our involvement in education in the contemporary experience is attempting to measure up to the definition of intelligence. To be productive as they are, as successful as they are, to be intelligent as they are, and in doing so, we have lost the encompassing nature of our definition of intelligence, Indigenous intelligence. Whether it's the name of providing an economic base, pioneering some great invention, or furnishing a breakthrough for the future, if our use of our knowledge and our approach disturbs and disrupts the balance and harmony the life around us, it cannot be considered an intelligent act, according to the Indigenous standards of intelligence. So then why are we messing up all the water? Why are we taking out all the oil? Right? It goes right to the central core of modern day society. The so-called sciences, our economies are based on extraction of oils and minerals and the timber. Why are we leaving your grandchildren with no oil? Why are we polluting the air? Why are we polluting the rivers, the very water that we need to drink? So these are challenging questions. And for us, in the Indigenous world, and I can show you countless examples of Indigenous leadership back in the 17th century, the materials that were written during the 18th century, we said the exact same words as those that are up there in different ways. We consider the Europeans adolescents. Okay, the science, the technology of Europeans were considered adolescents. and the language was an adolescent's language. In that we considered ourselves not just the Ojibwe, the Haudenosaunee, the other communities, the other nations in this country, basically all said the same thing. Our European brothers are like adolescents. They're playing at this world. And how can you destroy something that's the very source of your life, namely Mother Earth? Next slide, please. Another dear friend that I only got to meet once, but was my hero when I was an undergraduate, was Dr. Vine Delorier, a Sioux man from Rosebud Sioux, South Dakota. And he said, basically, he's talking about the Western European philosophy. The fallacies that Alfred North Whitehead identified within the Western philosophical tradition was the belief that principles of philosophy were clear, obvious, and irreformable, excuse me. Okay, that's the philosophy of Western European knowledge and science. That it's clear, that's obvious, and irreformable. He goes on further to say that science and technology reign today as the practical gods of the modern age. They give us the power to disrupt nature, but little real insight into how it functions. That comes from a book called Spirit and Reason, 1999, if you're interested. It's good reading, you should read this material. These are the early professors of Indigenous studies. When I was just an undergrad, at a time when there was only less than, I think when I first went to university, there was less than 200 of us enrolled at university. And then it, blossomed beyond that, and it went crazy for a while. So what we did in Native studies was pioneering work. I was part of I grew up in Michigan, in Detroit. My mother is from Mexico. I grew up in a Mexican ghetto in Detroit. And I was a member of the Brown Beret and La Raza. I don't know if you know what those are. The brown indigenous music, the Brown Beret and the La Raza movements were the largest indigenous union in the world, and continues to this day to be the largest labor indigenous movement in the United States and elsewhere. We were protesting lettuce and grapes and things produced by the local farm workers in the United States, calling for better wages, health care, blah, blah, blah. But it was a large labor organization movement. So people like Cesar Chavez and Vicky Carr and others were kind of like household name for me when I grew up. And then, so I grew up on the campus. I grew up at Western Michigan, Eastern Michigan, Ypsilanti campus, Ann Arbor. So I played in the halls while my mother was going to school. So kind of fell into it naturally. Next slide. Okay, so number one of the main principles that we've learned over the years is that Indigenous knowledge does not exist in the schools of academia. So if you're coming here, I don't know if there's anybody out there going to study Indigenous studies or come to school here to learn about Indigenous culture, history, and that, you won't necessarily find it here. Not in these academic halls. And there's a good reason for that. You might find that you might go to the E99 section in your local library here. You'll find E99s, E98, E97, all the way up to 2000, I believe, full of ethnographies and stories and collections of materials in the library. At the bigger libraries, like at Western, like I used to live in London last year, I'd go up there occasionally, and there's like 3 or 4 rows of Indian section, the Indian books, where the primitives live in the library. So that's what you can actually walk in there and you can find the books on the primitive savage of North America, E99s in particular. So indigenous knowledge, what is termed indigenous knowledge, does not exist there. There's some useful information. That's about it. And I'll get to talk about those a little later on. I can't remember what DNE stands for. Anyway, Indian Affairs doesn't exist. Indian Affairs knowledge, yes, they have a lot of knowledge. They've collected massive amounts of data, information, but it still doesn't really say where indigenous knowledge exists. So you can go to the main library in Ottawa and go to a big, huge file, almost a whole floor, called RG10. So the government conveniently put all RG10 documents, all Indian documents, on one big floor. A massive, massive archive, a historical archive. So they would measure things like brain sizes, teeth, all kinds of stuff was put in there because somebody was recording all this information. And all this data is composed there in RG10, what's called RG10. And, but again, indigenous knowledge, I'm not sure if indigenous knowledge exists there. There's a lot of data, and it's a lot of useful data. Like you would find files at RG10 about how the early father of the Canadian food guide, the great wise doctor, you can look this up. There's a doctor who produced the first food guide. He practiced on the children at the residential school. So he practiced seeing how much calories they can sustain their body over a period of time. So that's how he come up with the 2,000 mark calorie guide. So those files exist on RG10. And you can go find them yourselves if you ever want to look at that stuff. So it doesn't exist there. In a cloud, we're not sure yet exactly what a cloud is. You got this thing hanging up there in the sky, and you have a bunch of data up there, and you got a kite string that leads up to that cloud. So we're still kind of not sure, does indigenous knowledge exist there? For sure, though, it exists with the language speakers and those practitioners of culture, and who are tied, very closely with a lot of the elders. The challenge we're facing, and specifically with the Anishinaabeg, the Ojibwe people, is that we are, a majority of the speakers that we have left are in their 70s. And so we're in a really, even though it might say on Google or someplace like that, if you go look it up, we have like 30,000, 40,000 speakers. We don't think we do. So we're trying to get accurate reading on where we're at currently with the numbers of speakers, who then have a higher, there's all kinds of levels of speakers. You have an everyday speaker, somebody who just goes to the gas station and they talk in the language. You have teachers, a very few limited group of teachers who have been teaching the language for a number of years, so they're applying that knowledge. And then there's ceremonial leaders, again, a very small group of people. So we need to get the numbers on the language loss and culture loss, because it's just going more rapidly than we could ever imagine. And some of us fear the worst. But it's a nightmare that a number of us continue to live with, that loss of the language and loss of our culture. So most importantly, though, indigenous knowledge thrives and continues to be with us. And I'm going to push it here, the envelope a little bit. It survives through our epigenetic modeling, through the epigenetic coding, so that every child that is born already has the language. So you'll hear often that we're losing our language, we've lost our language, but modern scientists tell us that it takes 4 to 5 generations for us to really lose a language. So we haven't reached that number yet. We're not at the fourth generation. We're getting close. We have some communities where I come from where there's very few language speakers left. We have other communities where there's still language speakers. Like here in Rama, just across the lake there's a sufficient body of speakers. But again, they're not all active, but there is speakers left. And here we are in Southern Ontario. So further north you go in some communities, there's more speakers. And again, there's all types of various levels of speakers left. So what I'm here to describe and to talk about is how we've been activating our minds, the indigenous minds. One of my drawings there, the big upper right, your left side. This is an Ojibwe Anishinaabe scroll that sits at the Museum of Civilization Museum in Ottawa. It's part of what is called the Reagan Collection. This story that's pictured here, by the way, just to let you know how our indigenous minds work, is over 500 years old. They did the radiocarbon dating on these particular scrolls. And this one here is would hang this way. So one part would be on the ground and the other part is vertical. It's a picture writing system that the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe Anishinaabe, had perfected. And we've been utilizing this for well over 2,000 years. Pictographic writing on birch bark. It's a writing system. It doesn't have to be Roman orthography to be a writing system. You can have three-dimensional, you can have mats, you can have woven blankets, buffalo hides, carvings, all kind of writing systems exist in the world today. Roman orthography is relatively new. So there's other means of writing. So the Anishinaabe have a writing system that's very old. That one describes a migration. It describes a migration. The reason I can talk about this is because it's public domain knowledge sitting in a museum. So here's the eastern coast, the Great Lakes, Wawiatanong, where I'm born, center of the universe. Just kidding. Lighten up. Lake Huron and Lake Superior over here. It's a migration story, a movement of governance and social, cultural movement across the land, beginning about 2,000 years ago. So it's in picture form. We have a written language. You'll hear people say that we didn't have a written language. Next slide, please. So I like this quote here. In 1820, George Sibley, who was an Indian agent for the Osage people. Osage are north central Oklahoma. And they were displaced numerous times, but they eventually settled there in Oklahoma. He was trying to convince this chief called Big Soldier to give up everything of being Osage and become white, or a white brown man. And this was his reply. He said, I see and admire the manner of your living, your good warm houses, your extensive fields of corn, your gardens, your cows, oxen, workhouses, wagons, 1,000 machines that I know not the use of. I see that you're able to clothe yourselves, even from weeds and grass. In short, you can do almost what you choose. You whites possess the power of subduing almost every animal to your use. You are surrounded by slaves. Everything about you is in chains, and you are slaves yourselves. I fear if I should exchange my pursuits for yours, I too will become a slave. That's 1820. So we're we've been saying these things. We've been saying these things. We've been dissidents and radicalized and been decolonizing, right? I'm not sure about the term decolonization. I'm thinking just return to ourselves. And decolonizing means to me more like a commodity, means more like money kind of thing. So if we're just returning to ourselves, what we've always been, then it's not decolonizing. We're just saying what we've always been saying all along, that the modern European science, technology is adolescence-based. And that we have to do something seriously now as people, all of us, because we don't have too much longer. We're going to destroy the very planet that we live on. So how intelligent is that? Next slide, please. So just to kind of refamiliarize yourselves with linear thinking. How many of you do linear thinking? Probably most of you here at the university now, we're stuck into this linear thought processes. The system of European knowledge defines and redefines itself. Its narrow, singular, myopic, perpendicular framework. Ultimately, it self-destructs. It's a very clear, straightforward, logical progression of thought. Myopia, or singular vision, one eye, that projects and motivates the whole scientific world. It's intelligence, but after a while, routine develops. So within that routine, it becomes the accepted truth. Once the parameters of that logical thought process is set up, it just becomes routine. Nothing becomes new. There's new knowledge, new innovation comes along slowly. So eventually intelligence, what we know as intelligence, vanishes. In so doing, we agree that there are certain sets of presuppositions. So we all agree that you don't rock the boat. Even for the faculty and the prisoners, I'll say prisoners, the professors at the university who are locked within the academic world don't rattle the boat too much. It's just assumed that these presuppositions exist, and that we dare not question anything. But over time, people have begun questioning the very roots of Western academia, and especially you begin to see this with the women's movement, the feminist movement. You get to see radical changes in certain disciplines, sociology in particular, social work. So a lot of these disciplines have been changing slowly and questioning the very values of academic world. When I was last teaching at the colleges, we lived in an area that was a very high population of Arabic and Arabic-speaking peoples in Windsor, one of the largest populations in southern Canada. And yet at the university and at the college, there was only 2 faculty who were Arabic, who spoke Farsi. So a number of us radical academics got together, formed a committee. We looked at the numbers and we just said, what's wrong with this picture? When the population that you serve right here in Windsor is not even being serviced. And many of the students speak Farsi and speak other Arabic languages. You have 2 not even full-time faculty. So you're not responding. The university just, they went on and on and on about, hiring policies, blah, blah, blah. It slowly changed. It took them, 5 or 6 years after we did the report. And then a number of us just got fed up with that and just left that. It was just disheartening. So some of the problems then that we've encountered with European sciences, social sciences in particular, this image here, by the way, comes from a textbook. So every child that's taught in the Canadian universities or Canadian high schools and books across the country are still seeing images like this. I remember the last time I went to the ROM, which was about 6 years ago, there's a diorama like this, the buffalo, and Indian dudes out there with big rocks and spears going to take down the buffalo and knock it out with a big rock or a big spear. And museums abounded in these type of panoramas depicting the big game hunters, the wild, big game indigenous hunters. That's how we're portrayed. How could these people running around the bush, half starving, half naked, have an intellectual philosophy? How could we know about all the planets and name them by name? This is what was told to us. Even when I went to school, argued with anthropological professors, same arguments, and it just raged on and on. This type of, I think it's actually an abusive situation to go to a school and then be taught that your people come from the Bering Straits. Your people never had the wheel, you never had the number 0, but yet, I'll get into that a bit later, but yet we still, these are images that are being taught in the Canadian school system. They don't come right out and say that this is what's happening, but this is what the implicit images show and depict. We have long established and known that Western European sciences are in the adolescence phase. They're just very small, very limited, unfortunately. Immaturity is abundant, destroying the very planet that we live within. And is that intelligent? I keep asking, is that intelligence? And you have to question this as well. Is this intelligence to destroy the planet that we live on? Is it an intelligent way to be? So you're going to school. If it's not, then let's do something about it. Let's change it. Let's get intelligent. Let's all get smart. European science throws out all the anomalies. So I did this little equation on the bottom, A equals B equals C, and then there's a bunch of messed up letters. So the anomalies. Now, in my culture, we live for the anomaly. The anomaly is what makes life worth living, right? But in the Western tradition, we know that you supply 10,000 Tylenol aspirins to 10,000 people. Of that group, half of them get a placebo, half of them get better with the placebo. So the anomalies are tossed out, right? They don't know what to do with the anomalies. In the science labs, there's anomalies all the time. So the anomalies are tossed out. Let's just deal with the facts, straight facts, the straight data. Next slide, please. So Anishinaabe data, the data that we have been composing and collecting for many years, we see the fallacy of expansion, of European expansion, as a great and courageous thing. It's portrayed in that way. Last weekend was Thanksgiving in the United States. How many ever go to the States, see the Thanksgiving? All the stuff that's there. They got the Pilgrim Fathers, the great Pilgrim Fathers, sitting down to have dinner with the Indians. A few Indian dudes with a bunch of feathers on their heads. But if you actually know what happened in that story, Squanto, the guy who celebrated the first Thanksgiving, went over to Europe, was an indentured servant, a slave, bought his way out of that slavery, bought a ticket back to the States, came back about 10, 15 years later to his home community in Connecticut. And what did he find? He found all his family dead. his whole community dead by disease. So he had no choice but to eat dinner with those other guys. And that was the great American Thanksgiving. So the fallacy, it's a fallacy. The sooner you wake up to the lie that they've been feeding you, the better off you're going to be. We got to wake up. So, Western economy, the great economy that has built this world, is also a fallacy. It's based on slavery and based on prisoners. We can't get away from it. We can't deny it. So the early land speculators, like the great Talbot, like down in southern Ontario, George Talbot, I believe, he's got monuments all over the place. Ryerson, there's all kinds of monuments all over the country of these great chauvinists who were land speculators, stealers of land, and very wealthy people. Became very wealthy as a result of land speculation. In fact, this whole land here used to belong, and still does, I think, belong to the people of Rama, who were swindled out of their homeland and forced to move across where they couldn't grow anything on the rocks. And then there's, we don't want to go into, there's a lot of things in the area here, but well, that's just one little example of the of land stealing. So the founding fathers of both were both slave owners, thieves, and wealthy land speculators. So in Canada, present-day Canada, after we go back about 35 years, just in the Canadian law system, legal tradition, every successive government, whether they're the suit of Gucci, of Trudeau, or Tommy Hilfiger, all the suit guys go back every year after year and get a new reading from the court on Aboriginal title. Why? The courts have ruled over and over and successfully over and over again, Aboriginal title exists. You have to deal with these people. That's what the courts say. You must deal with them because, one, they own the land. 3/4 of Canada has never been transferred into British Crown. So you got to deal with them. You got to work with them. They own the land. They own the waters, for sure. In my community, we live along the Thames River, 15 minutes from Lake Erie, 40 minutes from Lake Huron, and all the water that connects those two great bodies of water. We've never signed any of the water away. Now, in my mind, I'm thinking, geez, we could bottle that stuff up and sell it. Even if we could sell it at $30, 30 cents a bottle, we'd still make a killing. Anyway, so I'm just thinking there's some economic development projects to get us out of the destitute state. Anyway, so the land mass of Canada is still in question, but the courts, the Supreme Court has ruled Indigenous people who are here still own the land. And that's the big challenge. It's a big challenge. I don't know how we're going to resolve it. Probably with lots of presents and gifts to each other, lots of feasts, lots of dancing, and maybe some ceremony, and probably lots of cash. We've been telling the Canadian government, I began, once I was an undergraduate, after my first successful, dismal first year at university, I barely eked out a D grade, but nonetheless, I was still there, still involved. You know how you can get socially involved in your first year? That kind of happens to a lot of students. So that happened to me, so I barely made my first year, but that summer then I worked for my own community and began a project of research on the Mount Elgin Residential School, one of the first Indian residential schools in Canada, and situated in my community. There was only 3 of them that were put into the internal workings of the community. Mount Elgin was the first one, 1846, I believe. So we have known, and we have been saying this for years, but nobody would listen. The government wouldn't listen, our own band council wouldn't listen. The elders that I worked with to gather all the stories surely knew this. We know exactly where the graves were. We've been saying this for years. The records that we obtained through the research from the church indicated that there were graves. We've been saying this for years. Why all of a sudden? That's the question I ask. Why all of a sudden does the government acknowledge that there's these graves in these reserve schools? So somewhere in there, there's something's going wrong. There's a cover up. Next, thank you. So very few and brave academics will venture into the indigenous area. I have a good friend at Trent University. He began research with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He went through all kinds of security briefings. It took him 6 months to just clear all the security and all the psychological tests that he had to take and all the clearance from the federal government to do this type of work. And what he basically found out, just read at RG10, was that this guy who wrote the Canada Food Guide practiced on the kids at the school. Starve them, give them vitamins, see what happens. At my school, at my reserve school, we had a barn. When we were kids, we used to play there. There was this big barn, and inside the barn was these stacks and stacks of these boxes wrapped up in this brown paper stuff. So we broke into them because nobody was there to look after us. We broke into the boxes and found these square things about this big, about that thick, about that wide. And they're kind of like a cell phone. You could actually whip them at each other. And we had wars with them, and they wouldn't break. This is what this guy was feeding the kids. Still left in the barn after years. Some kind of nutritional Nutrigrain bar. That's where I'm sure Nutrigrain came from, but they added fruit in between and called it like an Oreo thing. But these was what they gave to the kids. And I found out through research that the community members called them dog biscuits. And the laugh was because even the dogs who will eat most anything on the reserve, oatmeal and all kinds, whatever is left over, that's their food. The dogs won't even eat those things. That's how bad they were. So there's been a few academics over the years to delve into indigenous knowledge and to actually work with us, but they've been cast out. The moment you start to say something about the fallacy, you get tossed out. So what is it that we're rejecting? We systematically reject the artificial forcing of nature to tell us about herself. Got it? Some lab somewhere, some guy, some professor, man or woman, I don't know who, is forcing nature, forcing her, Mother Earth, to conform, to comply with their limited science understanding. So we reject that. You can't take the nature out of the nature. She exists out there on the land, on the earth, in the waters, the rocks, the trees. She exists. That's all you have to know. Just leave an open mind. She exists, and you don't have to think beyond that. Once you start working with her, it changes the whole perspective. And so this is I would imagine you could say a lot about how women are treated in one society to another society. Western science prematurely derives its laws as the final obvious. It's how the universe operates. Isn't it obvious that Western science is the only science? Right? That's what we hear all the time. Science is going to save us. The technology is going to save us. It's the only science. It's the only science of the whole universe. There's no other science. It's the only science. It's the supreme science of the world. And in fact, the cosmos, everything operates like that. And we're just saying, no, there's another way to see this. So we are rejecting out of the box, or within that box, we reject that there's only one science in the whole world. That's not true. That's a fallacy. There's many sciences. Our particular science, our particular form of science for indigenous peoples lives and thrives with anomalies, with what you would call spirit or heart or emotion. Things that, like Einstein said, things that are spooky at a distance, right? You ever have those kind of things? Intuitions? Spooky things that happen in nighttime? Things that happen at a distance? The anomalies? Well, in our culture, we live for those. We cherish them. We can't wait till we have one, an anomaly. So this is in Ohio. This is the Great Serpent Mound. Now, the way that we're portrayed by the scientific community is these people who are running around the bush, half starving, half naked. If you read any section of E99, you read E99, E98s, particularly about the Ojibwe Chippewa people who live here. They called us big game hunters. They said that we basically could are just on the brink of starvation, and that this caused us to have all these types of beliefs about the Wendigo spirit, all kind of things like that. But what they really never tell you is, well, if we're living here in the Great Lakes, who the hell built these things? So go to Ohio, still Anishinaabeg territory. Go to Peterborough, go on the south side of Peterborough, and there's a Great Serpent Mound there. A small one, not as big as this one. But mathematically, how do you take this one here? So in the star world, you have these stars. You have this Big Dipper up there, and you have these other constellations that have been coming up for thousands and thousands of years. So how do you take those stars and put them onto the Earth and then make a big mound in exact alignment with those stars and planets? So you wake up one morning, you woke up, you next to your partner, hey, I had this dream, this amazing dream. We're going to build a big friggin' serpent mound over there. We're going to employ people for about 10 years. They're going to carry basket loads of earth, and we're going to make this serpent mound. We're going to use that center of that door over there, and we're going to use the center of this thing here. We're going to put that line right down the middle. That'll be the first line, right? Right there, we're going to put that one like that. And we use the other line that way. So how do we take up there what we see as observable data and bring it to the Earth? How do we do it? Anybody know? You're all social workers, social scientists, psychologists? Come on, somebody knows. You need to have pi. Remember high school? You need to have pi in your mathematics. Okay, so in order to take what's up there, observable data, the stars, the movement of the planets, the elliptic of the sun, the moon, you need to take that stuff and bring it onto the Earth. Because you're not going to use that big tree over there or that corner of that doorway. You use it as your first sight line. You want to be bang on the equinox, on the solstice and so on, you got to be bang on. So you need to have pi. The only way to get pi, the only way, I don't care what mathematics you use, binary or 10-based mathematics. I like binary math, Mayan binary math. You need 0. You need 0 to get to pi. Now, go back to a couple screens earlier where there's the big mammoth hunters with the big rocks, bad hair day dudes. How did they invent pi? Right? That's what we're told, right? Those guys who are hunting the woolly mammoths over there, they could never have invented pi. They don't even know how to use. They have the most primitive looking rocks. And they're taking down woolly mammoths with stones. But yet, somebody built these, must have been aliens. Or I don't know, Egyptians or somebody come along and built these things. And he used pi to put it all together. Well, we've had 0 in our mathematics for maybe 2,000 years. We've had 0 in our mathematics written in stone in Central America for at least 2,000 years. We know that. It's confirmed over and over again. It's written in rock. How can you build a gigantic pyramid of stone without having mathematics? You don't employ thousands of people and just say, well, we'll just put it here. Well, maybe we'll go 3 feet this way instead. Or maybe we'll go 10 feet that way. We have to be exact in order to build something like that. And you need 0. And you need pi, and you need a bunch of other calculations. So I'm just put that there because indigenous intelligence is far superior than the modern day world. Next slide, please. Time is it anyway? I gotta time myself. Anybody see the time? Okay, so I gotta get moving then. This is Cahokia, another great Anishinaabe city. Population of around 200,000 at the time of European invasion. 200,000 people living there peacefully. Okay. Bigger than Paris. Next slide, please. Serpent Mounds, I covered them. I'll move, next slide, please. So, how do we return to ourselves? This is a big question. Here's Serpent Mounds near Peterborough. If you take a look at this progression right there, that's the elliptic, the sun's elliptic. Bang, right on, dead on. You can't mistake it. It's about 1,500 years old. So, the grounding that we need to look for, the source of indigenous knowledge to return to ourselves is to return to our language. It's always been there. It's not going to be found in the universities, unfortunately. Well, they help. You get a good job, get a good retirement. But for most of us, we need to return to our language. It's the source of who we are. It's the source of our vision, the source of our knowledge, the source of our knowing. It's through our language and cultures. We can't measure up to become European. It's just not possible. It's a limited science as far as we're concerned. So in our language, some rocks are alive. In Ojibwe, there's 4,500, 5,000 verbs. English language has 7 major pronouns. We have 22. And then the tail endings, there's limited, many words that we use. It's all verb-based. Our language is divided into animate and inanimate. Some rocks are alive. There's a way to determine that as well. Anyway, so, and in terms of the academic world, and this is what bothered me the most, is that we have been struggling to put together our own accredited universities colleges to meet our needs within our communities. But in the last few years, all the money the province has been shooting at us is going to hire VPs. So every major university has Indigenous VP or Indigenous provost or a special Indigenous academic advisor. And then we have some universities building big buildings called the Indigenous unit. Meanwhile, the Indigenous institutes are struggling. We've been saying we want our own universities, we want our own places to teach and define the standards by which intelligence is measured by our own terms for well over 35, 40 years now. We've been saying this. Pretty soon the old faculty die off and we look around, we see Lakehead, we see Laurentian, we see Western, we see Hamilton, we see all these universities in Ontario building up their Indigenous studies programs. I'm not saying that that's bad, I'm just saying that Indigenous knowledge does not exist in the academic world. We should set our own terms. People in our own communities have bought into this and they ask us, well, how can we accredit our own people? Who's going to accredit our own people? We do. We'll accredit our own people. Next page, please. So I'm just, so this is one of the main things that I've been talking about for a long time now. I continue to people are probably getting sick of me talking about this, but we need our own academic institutions that where we can take our young people and ground them in their language, in their philosophies, in their epistemologies. Once they get through that system, a BA or a BSW or whatever we want to call it, they can go on to university, mainstream university. But they need to be grounded first. Our own school systems are not grounding our children in their history. We're being taught a bifurcated, bicultural, bilingual sets of language and bifurcated, bicultural sets of science. We can be using Anishinaabeg science. It's far superior because we keep all the anomalies and we still have scientific method. So I'm been promoting this for some time now and continue to support this and move and make this become a reality. One of my missions in life. That's another scroll. Just by the way, this is from Washington, so I draw these things. This is from the Smithsonian, and there are 4 colors of humankind that are brought down to the earth. That's one of them, one of the creation scrolls. It's public domain knowledge. How did a bunch of run around the bush, half naked, half starving people know 4 colors that would be brought here to this place? Anyway, that's another story. That's a whole nother lecture. Next slide, please. And lastly is our epigenetic modeling. I wanted to cover that because that gets to the core of who we are. Modern science has only come about within the last 10 to 12 years to finally say, they never said this though, I was waiting for it. All you Indigenous people in the Americas, you guys are like 50 years ahead of us because you've already said this and told us about ancestors. So modern psychology has just determined this within the last 10 years. It's finally making its way into university halls in the past 3 or 4 years. You carry all the genetic codes from your ancestors, each one of you. Handed down, you got 4 grandparents in front of you, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents, and it just goes on and on and on. All that genetic memory is passed on. So modern science, psychological science, has just confirmed this, okay? And so then when we look at the culture loss, We've known this. We've been operating with these things. We use these things in our healing programs. It's phenomenal. We can actually move young children. I work off and on for the past 25 years as the ceremonial and therapist at a youth treatment solvent abuse center, Southwestern Ontario. So I just came back from a 3 or 4 day work there with the young kids, and we tap into their epigenetic codes. We work with them, we work with their ancestors, and work with them to find healing from drug addiction and cutting and all the other stuff that they're getting into. So we know it works. We've been using these models for a long, long time. And in fact, in the Ojibwe language, we have names for all those things that you would find in DNA, not the mononucleoids and all those things like that, but we have names for the strands on the DNA code. We have names for our ancestors. We've known about this and utilized that for a long, long time. So all this to say is that, we're doing these things for ourselves. Oh, and you'll probably see Zucky and Facebook on there. So the transmission is not found. I know that a lot of people use Facebook, and you can go onto the Anishinaabeg sites and see what's happening in Indian country, but they're kind of owned by the guy. Reconnecting to our ancestral past is primary, is key and primary, and nobody can do this for us. The church can't do it for us. Indian Affairs can't do it for us. This is just something that has to be done internally. And I think we need time to do this. That's why I'm not promoting reconciliation. Just send the cash to the churches. If you're interested in reconciling, send the cash first. After about 15 years of sending cash, massive amounts of cash, the kids are going to figure out what to do with all the gifts. Because in our culture, when you have a problem, you send the other family gifts. Horses, blankets, things like that, gifts. After some time, when there's enough gifts exchanged, then you can start to move towards reconciliation. That's just the way it works in our community. So if you hear of anybody wanting to send gifts, just send the gifts, send the money, and we'll figure out reconciliation maybe 2 generations away. So that's my talk. I know it was, I think that's it, isn't it? Yeah. My email and my website still under construction, so it's not even operating. I belonged to the first department that created the first Indigenous social work program. I wrote half of the curriculum and then got it accredited. The idea there is that we were going to move the curriculum from the university at Laurentian into the community. It was a 3-way ownership. Robinson Huron Chiefs, our department, and Laurentian. But unfortunately, Laurentian took it all. So we were supposed to move it into the community. That was the idea. To take it outside the university and put it into the communities where it was needed. Same kind of social work, but we changed it much, much more dramatically. Anyway, thank you for listening to me. Any questions? Yeah. That's a good question.
So you were saying that Indigenous knowledge recognizes the anomaly. Could you give another example of that?
Well, it's very obvious that most of you have all taken psychology, right? How many of you have taken Psychology 101? Okay, great. What is it all about? The mind. Do you talk about emotions? Very little. Do you get to talk about trauma? A little bit. It's pretty well defined within a narrow box, correct? Do you talk about soul? No, you don't. Do you talk about dreams in modern psychology? No. So in our world, in my world, we have what, 15, 13, 14, 15 categories of dreams. So I'm sitting there thinking today, I was looking on my computer, I'm doing this lecture, sitting there looking at it, and then this thing comes on, Google says, hey, you better buy a ticket because you missed the Tuesday night's draw. So I started dreaming there. Man, what would I do with that kind of money? If I could win that money, if my lucky numbers could come in. So I'm in a dream state. It's a state of mind. It's a dream state, awakened state of mind. So dreams, we have all these categories of dreams, from everyday dream right to the top of the line, life-shattering, earth-changing dream of a lifetime. We have names for each one of those dreams. So in our world, in our psychology, dreams are very important. They're the windows to the soul. You can't have a soul without having a body, but the body only lasts for so long, as well as the spirit that dwells and activates the body. But the soul is the one that pushes the body. So the whole concept of soul, it's not talked about here. Where are you going to talk about it at the university? What course would you find to talk about the soul at the university? In the humanities, maybe. In the religious studies section, right? They're not the real scientists, though, right? That's the religious studies people, or the fanatics at the University of Toronto. What's the campus there? St. George's, yeah. I went to that college. So that's where you get to talk about the soul, but in psychology, we don't talk about the soul. We don't talk about dreams. Very few universities have dream labs, but again, it's very technical within the limitations of the science. And so in our world, then, the anomalies are dreams. How you have a dream you have a dream. A dream is like going to the movies, right? Except you pay to go to the movies. You pay $20, $30 to go to the movies to see somebody that's 10 feet tall, when you can dream every night, when you can get to 3 or 4 dreams a night, when you get to instructional dreams, when you get to dreams that are telling the future. So that's just some example. There's many more. Spirit is a big part of it. Spirit. We see the whole universe all connected in this massive web of spirit, of energy. So another anomaly, you don't talk about it in the science world. Good? Okay, thank you. Any more? I'll take maybe 1 or 2 more.
Yeah, we do have a question from the chat. So the first question would you consider native language courses, and introduction to ceremonies as a forward step to Indigenous knowledge in academia?
No. They work. I mean, I think it's valid. I think people need that. I think people need to learn the discipline of that type of study of language within the university, within post-secondary, but is it going to save our languages? I don't know. I have serious doubts. An example is in my community where I live in 3 communities: Chippewa-the-Thames, Muncie, Delaware, and Oneida. Oneida currently has 22 speakers left in the world. That's it. 22 speakers left of the language in the world, of that particular language. Muncie, Delaware, which is on our side of the river, has 0 language speakers left. The last one died last month. And so I have a lot of relatives in the community. We've lived together for almost 200 years. And I know many of the language speakers who are speaking in Oneida, at Oneida. I know a number of the language speakers at Muncie, Delaware. They went to school, they tried everything they could do to get their paperwork, to get credentials to become a linguist, to study their language, which they did. They got their degree, they attended courses, but it still, at the end of the day, it didn't matter. Because now Muncie, Delaware is without any language speaker. So I don't know. I don't know if it's going to help our communities by having university courses. Again, Indigenous knowledge doesn't exist here. It doesn't exist here.
Thank you so much. We have one more question online.
Sure.
What would your solutions be towards introducing Native knowledge to the Western Adolescent Mindset Institutes? More language or more ceremonies as examples?
No. What I'm trying to say to the academic world is study yourselves. We have rows and rows of books written about us, our thick skulls, our size of our brains, the size of the craniums, how many teeth we have, the way that our teeth structures are made, and on it goes, just vast amounts of data collected on us. And that it doesn't mean more ceremonies. It's not going to make that much of a difference. We have to be given the freedom to validate ourselves in knowing who we are first. The validation of us by ourselves, by our own people, understanding our language, knowing our language, preserving our language. Within the academic world needs to question its abuser state. They're continuing to abuse our people. We've been demanding our own institutions for ourselves, by ourselves, accredited by ourselves for many years. And we're still nowhere near it. So academia has to change its thinking. It's not the only science. And once they begin to question that, then maybe they'll begin to understand. We need to do something quickly, though. Anyway, thank you. Online, way in the back, yes, okay. Toss up a coin.
So yeah, hello, okay, good. Thank you for the talk, and I think this talk is super important, especially when you're talking about language preservation. I was gifted doing research on Vancouver Island, and one of the byproducts was that I ran into someone who was in my research, but he was one of the last surviving of the Sinemo language on Vancouver Island. So it's super important. So thank you for this talk. My question is, besides language, I know you talked about a little bit of, starting a school and having them defy intelligence. In what way would you also want to define intelligence? What does intelligence mean to you in terms of when you're opening up a school and stuff like that? So just, yeah.
I think in terms of the language, you know how we have beginner language, and then all through the grades, we need to, as a community, begin to mobilize the language teachers, identifying the language teachers, the language elders, the language speakers, and begin to seriously have conversations with one another where we can articulate the very minor details within each step of learning a language. We've been modeling our programs based on European bifurcation or bicultural linguistics. So what's happened then is that a small example is that in the dictionaries written by white men, they say this is a chair, but in our language, it's not a chair. It's just this object that you bend your body on and you sit on like that. So you could put a big rug on the floor and I could drag you on that and you're sitting on it and that becomes a chair. So I could put wheels on it and pull you across the room, or I could put an engine on it, now that becomes a chair too. So then in terms of the intelligence of our language, it's very sophisticated language. We're ranked as number 8 in the world's eighth most difficult language to learn in the world because of its structure. So then in terms of our intelligence, we see our intelligence is it's huge. In order to be able to define how a person can sit, there's, I don't know how many ways you can identify snow. There's probably 300 ways you can identify snow. So there's the observable data, right? The observable data of nature and the land and people. So I'm really interested in how exactly that question is, how we translate that into the application of learning models and then how we teach that. Right now, we're failing all of our children. Basic human right to teach the children in their language, to teach them their culture, we're failing it. We're allowing this to happen ourselves. Our own schools, our own communities are allowing Indian Affairs to dictate these are the standards. Thanks. Good question. Okay. Sure.
Hi, I was wondering, you mentioned doing epigenetic healing work, I think with children or youth. And I was really curious about that and wondering if you could elaborate a bit on what that looks like.
I developed a program at the colleges called Traditional Aboriginal Healing Methods. One of the challenges that we face, it's a political question as well. I believe that the government has called these programs healing programs. And they give us vast amounts of money for healing programs. We got healing programs here, we got healing programs over there, we got organizations completely devoted to healing. And yet we're missing the boat again. It's the same thing of applying the indigenous knowledge based within the language, the actual healing within the language. So then in our language, we talk to our ancestors. So when these young children come into our care at the treatment center, they're cutting, they're on some of them on methamphetamine and other types of drugs. One of the first questions that I ask with the team, we begin to ask them, well, do you have any dreams? Yeah, I have dreams. You have dreams about your ancestors? Yes. So that's the first signal then to begin that particular type of therapy. So then we start engaging with them in a more detailed way. We start asking more complex questions of them based on what they're talking about, what their dreams are telling them. And sometimes it's real simple, sometimes it's more complex. And then we use a number of other what are called seers who work with the child to contact a certain member of their family, deceased. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there somewhere that we could learn more about that? Maybe if we emailed you or somewhere online?
We don't really like to share it.
No, that's very fair. I'm being a bit nosy, but thank you.
But if you look under, there are people in the European tradition In fact, many of the women who were herbalists, midwives, psychologists, and seers would see the same thing. So the concept is not, it's not just limited to us. The concept of ancestors goes way back in many traditions all over the world. And so I think there are people who can do this within, I imagine right here in Aurelia. I think the word is major domo in the European tradition, the ones who transition people from this place to the other world. So you can go to school for it too, in Toronto.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I recognize we are at our minute, our time limit, but I'm just wondering, how many questions you might be willing to take here.
Okay, we'll take a few more.
Thank you so much. The first question is, can Anishinaabe tap into Mother Earth to teach us our language?
Can you repeat that?
Sure. So can Anishinaabe tap into Mother Earth to teach us our language?
I used to think so, but the more that I work in that, and the more that I keep learning, the earth can teach us, but again, the language is from the earth. So all observable data in the natural world is explained in the language, right down to the minutest details. Our language is so precise that you can come to a pile of bear dung, just fresh, eating berries in the summer morning in August, and it's just steaming, and you can just describe in great detail how that dung just sits there in a pile, and it's steaming, and it's so fresh it just falls over. But will the earth tell us that? I don't know. I don't know if it's possible, but it could. Everything's possible. Everything's open for that. But again, that's why the language speakers are so critical. The men and women who are the hunters, the fishers, the gatherers, because they can explain in amazing amount of detail all the guts inside the pickerel. You know, you cut open the fish, and you got the floating stuff, you got the gizzards, you got all that. There's names, and they identify all those pieces. And when you hear that in the language, and working with those guts, and they're all slimy, and the scales and everything like that, you're working with all that in the language. It's like an amazing opportunity. We need to, that's where the language has to be almost spoken and heard. So there's that relationship that's developed between the younger person and the one who's speaking that. That's so important to have. Otherwise, you're going to be, I don't know, I imagine it can be that, or we don't know. We haven't run the test results on that stuff. So anything is possible. I hope, I mean, a lot of our children can't get out of a city. So then there's an opportunity, we have an opportunity to run our own metrics and our own science on that. That's much as I can say about that.
Thank you. Next question is, in 400 years, 20 generations since contact, assimilation process is dominant throughout North America. What solutions do you present to manifest a symbolic relationship between Native and Western societies?
What's symbolic? What can I make for that? A symbol. Well, it's been oppression after oppression, repression. It's not been a very happy one, but we're still here. So as the world is encountering, I think assimilation happens, but we're doing it to ourselves. I think that we've allowed ourselves to be putting something up there on a pedestal that says, this is how you should be in this modern world. You should have a job, and you should have a Mercedes-Benz car, and you should have a 5-bedroom home with 3-car garage and a couple dogs running around outside, and you should have this a good job and all this. And I think that's a fallacy, to be just like us. And if you look at all the expansion, like, I don't know if you noticed this, but Toronto's expanding like crazy. Everywhere you once went where there was fields of orchards and food, we now have massive housing complexes being built. So we're expanding. I think there's limits to how far we can do that. Again, that's a complex question. What do I symbolize that relationship to be? I don't know. I'm unsure how to answer that one. I don't know if that helps them. They could always email me. My email's on there. I'll try to answer that. Last one.
Thanks so much. Yeah, sure. Last one. So what are your thoughts of people who are not Indigenous embracing Indigenous tradition and culture?
Repeat that?
Sorry. What are your thoughts of people who are not Indigenous embracing Indigenous tradition and culture?
Well, I belong to the powwow arena. My good friend for many years, he was a powwow dancer. He was a really good dancer. He had one of the best outfits I've ever seen, like right down to the authentic fox crow belt. It was a certain style of belt worn on the plains, a crow belt. He grew up next to the reserve. His house literally was on the border of the reserve. All of his friends were from the reserve, the Winnebago tribe in Iowa. And he grew up living there next door to the community. He thought, and he was like rudely awakened when he was like about 18. His parents told him, you're not one of them. He grew up he thought he was Winnebago. He could speak Winnebago. He could dance with the best of them. He danced with them. He went to every ceremony. He participated in everything. He spoke more Winnebago than some Winnebago people. I have another friend who grew up in Northern Ontario. He too, when he was like 17 or something like that, his last name was why is my last name this Italian name? He asked his father, I said, well, you've grown up on the reserve all your life. You speak the language and you hunt like they do and you're just like them. So those are my friends. So I've never seen them as anything different other than human. But in terms of a whole society, I don't know if Trudeau will embrace Indigenous traditions, or I don't think everybody has to embrace and put on feathers and dance around like us to feel the earth and to feel what she's saying. I think there's some real fundamental human things that are just universal. So I don't know. Should you all go out and buy a book and become how to become Indian or a native at this? In one, somebody should write a book like that. The book for dummies. He got books for computers. You might as well have one for us and how to go to a powwow and fit in. I just don't. It's like in many communities, there's whole individuals who've been raised, who have been adopted by us into the community, who are from Scandinavia. We have a family in our community who are German and French. They've been raised in our community. They have Indian Act cards. And it's like that all right across the country. So I guess at the bottom of it all, what's human is human. We're just practicing being humans. But yeah, good question though.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you.
Miigwech. Thank you, Nicholas. Let's give Nicholas a hand. This is a very thought-provoking talk, and I'm sure it's given us all many things to think about. And those of you who are listening, hopefully you're thinking some critical things, some new thoughts that you have not considered before, particularly around what is intelligence and how intelligence is conceptualized, particularly Indigenous intelligence is conceptualized by the Eurocentric academe. And also, just as you were talking, it really brought to me just some thinking around how we seem to be distracted from the really important things, like Mother Earth and those priorities, and we seem to be often are different directions that are destructive. And so, Chi Miigwech, Marcy Cho, for really bringing us back to these important insights. Really glad you're able to come in the middle of a snow squall that could be developing here, certainly is, I think. And we're just so grateful on behalf of the School of Social Work and our wonderful Social Work 4411 class in the audience. Just want to really express our gratitude. It's a real gift to have you here tonight. So, Miigwech. So it's my pleasure to close the session and thanking everyone, of course, who attended our speaker series. And if you would be interested in joining any future events, please contact Mercedes Jocko. She's the Indigenous Initiatives Coordinator, or check out the Lakehead University Indigenous Initiatives event webpage for upcoming events and speakers. Chi Miigwech, Marcy Cho, a big thank you to all.